People assume empires fall through explosions, invasions, or final battles, but history usually proves otherwise. Most collapses arrive quietly via spreadsheets, debt statements, and small decisions that feel manageable today. Power fades, not with drama, but with accounting realities ignored, until consequences suddenly appear everywhere. A clear example unfolded during November 1956, when Britain discovered money outweighs military tradition itself. Britain did not lose armies, territory, or battles. It lost a decisive financial phone call. The United States warned that continuing operations in Egypt would trigger devastating financial retaliation immediately. Washington could sell pounds, block emergency funding, and sever lifelines sustaining Britain's economy at once. Faced with liquidity collapse, Britain folded within days, ending illusions after 11 humiliating days total. This moment shattered assumptions, showing power on paper fails when creditors change priorities suddenly abroad. Many dismiss Suez as isolated humiliation, but it represented accumulated consequences of long mismanagement years. The deeper story begins earlier, when Britain genuinely dominated trade finance and global commerce networks. During the 19th century, the pound served as essential infrastructure for international exchange everywhere globally. Central banks hoarded pounds, contracts used them, and borrowing remained cheap and plentiful for Britain. Deficits seemed harmless because demand persisted and credibility masked weakening fundamentals across the entire system. Economic dominance, however, shifted as American productivity, innovation, and wealth growth accelerated rapidly during decades. By the late 19th century, America surpassed Britain economically, though the pound lingered stubbornly atop. Financial systems resist change because switching costs inconvenience institutions' habits and political comfort entrenched interests. World War I should have forced adjustment, but Britain instead borrowed massively to survive conflict. By 1918, Britain transformed from global creditor into major debtor, especially to America financially exposed. Rather than accept reality, leaders doubled down, protecting appearances over sustainable economics and long-term. In 1925, Britain returned the pound to gold at unrealistic valuations, ignoring post-war economic damage. Defending that peg required painfully high interest rates, choking growth exports and employment nationwide persistently. Unemployment surged. While imperial commitments demanded spending, Britain increasingly could not afford, without borrowing heavily. These outcomes reflected denial, not misfortune, a refusal to acknowledge limits imposed by economic reality. During the 1930s, investors attacked the pound because arithmetic exposed unsustainable policies behind government choices. In 1931, Britain abandoned gold, and the pound devalued roughly 30% almost immediately thereafter. Despite devaluation, the pound remained important due to imperial reserve requirements imposed across colonial economies. Colonies like India, Australia, and Pakistan were compelled to hold sterling reserves regardless of preference. This arrangement reflected leverage over weaker partners rather than genuine financial strength or market confidence. Modern parallels appear in how dollar demand persists through energy pricing systems and global finance. World War II then compounded debt on unprecedented scale, draining Britain completely of financial autonomy. Britain borrowed over £14 billion, leaving obligations exceeding annual output by war's end alone. American loans and patience kept the system afloat despite effective bankruptcy recognized quietly by insiders. Nevertheless, leaders behaved as if global dominance remained intact and unquestioned across diplomacy, defense planning. In 1956, Egypt nationalized the Suez Canal, provoking imperial reflexes within British leadership circles immediately. Militarily, the operation functioned, yet politically and financially, it was doomed from the very start. American pressure focused not on tanks, but liquidity and currency markets controlling Britain's survival prospects. Reserves drained over £100 million weekly, risking systemic collapse unless compliance occurred swiftly. Within days, Britain accepted reality, recognizing dependence on external financiers rather than sovereign decision-making. The illusion endured decades, yet vanished in less than 2 weeks under concentrated financial pressure. This history echoes uncomfortably, when comparing Britain then with America today across fiscal and strategic. The similarities are structural, involving debt overextension and currency privilege, sustained by confidence inertia alone. Post-war Britain exceeded 200% debt to GDP ratios, reflecting wartime borrowing intensity extremes. America now approaches 120%, with deficits accelerating amid rising interest obligations annually. Over $2 trillion were added to debt this year alone, representing daily multi-billion. $7 billion daily merely sustains current governmental operations without reducing principal or future liabilities. Global military presence persists beyond financial logic, consuming vast resources through bases deployments, commitments worldwide. Defense spending exceeds combined outlays of multiple major powers, reinforcing assumptions of endless strategic dominance. Dollar reliance mirrors sterling through enforced demand in trade settlement, particularly energy commodities priced globally. Yet cracks appear as nations increasingly transact using alternative currencies, reducing unilateral monetary influence gradually. Decline feels slow until suddenly a tipping point arrives when confidence evaporates and systems reprice. Britain displayed warnings for decades, including debt industrial erosion overreach and fiscal imbalance accumulation patterns. Because the pound still functioned, leaders believed stability remained, despite mounting evidence contradicting that belief. One crisis then transformed dominance into dependency almost overnight, revealing fragility beneath long-standing monetary prestige. America nears its own stress point as interest costs surge across federal budgets, rapidly escalating. Annual interest payments may exceed $1 trillion, soon surpassing defense and major social programs. When interest dominates budgets, flexibility evaporates, and options narrow, forcing difficult trade-offs amid political resistance. Reserve currency status depends entirely on confidence discipline and productivity maintained consistently through policy choices. Once trust erodes, adjustment accelerates far faster than expected as markets reprice risk brutally honestly. Losing reserve status affects households through prices, rates, and purchasing power immediately, visibly, painfully nationwide. Britain endured higher import costs, inflation pressure, and declining living standards over prolonged post-war decades. Identical mechanics would apply elsewhere, regardless of national exceptionalism, myths, cultural narratives, or optimistic rhetoric. This analysis is not fear-mongering but basic monetary arithmetic grounded in historical precedent repeatedly observed. Collapse is not inevitable, but denial greatly increases risk when warnings are dismissed as inconvenient. Britain had opportunities to adjust course and reduce exposure through reform discipline and retrenchment earlier. Experts cautioned policymakers, yet advice conflicted with political incentives favoring short-term comfort over sustainability. Modern culture similarly resists acknowledging limits within abundance narratives promoted by credit expansion and optimism. Reserve currency status is not permanent ownership, but ongoing responsibility earned daily through prudent stewardship. Trust, discipline, and productivity must be renewed continuously by investment, innovation, sound governance, and restraint. When these foundations erode, endings arrive sooner than leaders expect, despite comforting narratives and denial. The lesson is not sudden powerlessness, but gradual rule enforcement through markets, creditors, and confidence. Pretending exemptions exist accelerates consequences rather than preventing them, as credibility weakens under scrutiny relentlessly. Britain learned this truth unmistakably during the Suez Crisis when financial leverage trumped military tradition. The contemporary question is whether America recognizes signals early before markets force abrupt adjustments externally, or whether leaders await their own destabilizing phone call from creditors, markets, or allies abroad. History suggests adjustments chosen voluntarily prove far less painful than those imposed suddenly by crisis. Financial sovereignty requires humility, realism, and willingness to retrench when arithmetic contradicts ambition and habit. Ignoring arithmetic merely delays reckoning, while magnifying eventual costs borne by citizens through inflation taxation. The past offers warnings, not predictions, demanding thoughtful response from policymakers, voters, and institutions alike. Understanding Suez reframes power as financial credibility rather than force alone or spectacle abroad militarily. Credibility once lost proves extraordinarily difficult to rebuild without years of discipline, reform and sacrifice. Prudent choices today reduce probability of abrupt disorder tomorrow within markets, currencies and geopolitical standing. Delay increases vulnerability as debt compounds and confidence thins across domestic and international investor bases. The warning is clear, if uncomfortable, for modern audiences accustomed to abundant stability and leverage. Power sustained by borrowing eventually answers to lenders regardless of flags, rhetoric or history invoked. Markets enforce limits impersonally, without regard for nostalgia, empire status, or cultural self-image pride. Learning this early preserves autonomy and reduces societal shock through smoother transitions, adjustments, reforms ahead. Ignoring it courts sudden upheaval felt most by ordinary people via prices, jobs, savings, security. History repeatedly shows spreadsheets decide outcomes before armies move borders or cannons fire shots loudly. Whether we heed that lesson now determines the gentleness of change ahead for everyone involved.